Hey folks, early January, and believe it or not, it's time to get onions in my garden. So I live in the Bay Area, Zone 9B, and early January is when we plant our onions. We grow either short day onions or intermediate day onions. And I've got a whole video on how to choose the right kind of onion for your latitude, as well as planting instructions all the way from start to finish. I will put a link to it at the end of this one, but I wanted to show you my process for planting and kind of really quickly recap what you need to think about when you plant onions. So obviously, point number one, grow the right type for your latitude. You can either grow short day, which is when the onions start to bulb when daylight reaches 10 to 12 hours, or you can grow intermediate day, which means that the onions will start to bulb when daylight reaches between 12 and 14 hours, or you can grow long day onions, which is the kind of onion that will start to bulb when day length reaches 14 to 16 hours. Now, in the Bay Area, the maximum length of day that we get is around 14 hours. So I am really pushing the border, the boundary, if I try to grow long day onions. And even for intermediate day onions, they just take forever to start bulbing. Onions are sensitive that way. They only start bulbing when the day length reaches a certain number of hours. So I think I'm best off growing short day onions, even though I'm technically allowed to grow intermediate day onions. My experience last year was it just held up my gardening beds for way too long. So this year I'm planting short day onions. I'm planting 3 varieties of onions. I'm planting red Creole, I'm planting Texas Super Sweet, and Texas Early White. These are all from Dixondale Farms, and there are actually 3 ways that you can grow onions. You can either start them from seed, which I'm also doing, by the way, or you can start them from transplants like I'm doing right here, or you can start them from sets. Don't start them from sets. My experience has been that they very quickly go to flower. Onions are biennial, which means that the second year they will produce that flower spike. And if they produce a flower spike, your onion pretty much, you got to pull it out. It's not going to grow anymore and it will rot very quickly. And when you buy sets, the onions are kind of pulled out when they're starting to bulb, so they're really confused for things, and they think that they're in their second year, and many of them will go to flower. So best way is to grow from seeds. It can be a little finicky, tricky. Second best way is to grow from transplants, which is what I'm doing right now. So the instructions for growing from transplants, I've actually found the best success growing in these kinds of tubs. I can control the fertility level and I can also control the moisture, both of which are super important when it comes to growing onions. They require the soil to be a little bit on the acidic side, and during the early days when they're producing a lot of green foliage, they need a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. So let's go ahead and plant these. I get them in a bunch from Dixondale Farms, and as soon as you get them, you've got to spread them out on a sheet of newspaper or something so that they can just air out after their long journey. So that's what I did this morning. I kind of spread them out, but you've got to get them into the soil very quickly. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm going to plant up my onions. Now, you want to plant them about 4 to 6 inches apart. Just think about the onion, how big it's going to grow. Roughly a diameter of 4 to 6 inches. So maybe a couple of inches on either side of the onion should be good enough. And you can pack in a lot of onions in a small space. That's one of the advantages. Now, you don't want to go too deep. You just want to barely bury the base of the onion. And I like to do this when it's not too hot outside, because I like to lay out my onions first, like I've done over here. And if I'm not planting them quickly and there's sun beating down on them, they dry out the onions. So do this either early morning or late in the evening. Let's go ahead and finish planting these. Okay, I'm all done planting these up. I've got a few left over. There's about 4 dozen that come in each bunch that I get from Dixondale, so that's about 48. And I've got a few left over. They always give a few extras. I'm going to plant them in different parts of my garden because I just want to see how these onions do in different places. I love experimenting. And speaking of experimenting, I will put a link to a video that I made last year on all the mistakes that I made growing onions and the consequences of it. I think you'll have a fun time watching it. Take care and enjoy your gardening season.